Hi everyone! Today we're going to talk a little bit about multicultural perspectives, diversity, and social justice counseling. This presentation starts with a few important definitions and then moves into a discussion of the content in the Sioux and Sioux text, chapters 4 and 5. Please review those sections before continuing on. I'll start today with a favorite quote that one of my mentors shared with us. Culture is like air, it's all around us, and we are immersed in it whether we notice it or not. The reason that I like this quote in particular is that Haber points out that many aspects of our culture are things that we don't even notice. I sometimes refer to these as our of courses. These are things that are, for example, the way things have always been, or things that everybody knows. However, what we sometimes forget is that our of courses and other people's of courses are likely different depending on where, when, and how we grew up. I'll give you an example. I'll start with a silly one. My mother's family is Italian. I grew up in New York City. My best friend was Polish. Her parents grew up in Poland and came to New York as adults. We often had dinner with each other's families. One night, my friend's mom invited me to stay for dinner. We were going to have spaghetti. I thought, great, it's one of my favorite meals. It still is. Jackie and I were helping her prepare dinner. We put some water on to boil, got the pasta out of the cabinet, and then I started to look for the canned tomatoes, the tomato paste, the garlic, fresh basil seasonings. But we never took them out. So I'm wondering to myself, how are we going to have spaghetti? When the pasta was ready, we put it into a bowl, and Jackie went to add the tomato sauce. I thought they were going to use canned sauce, which I guess is okay, right? But no, she got out the ketchup. Even as a quiet kid who always tried to be on my best behavior for my friend's parents, I couldn't contain my shock. "What are you doing?" I asked. Jackie and her mom looked confused. "What do you mean?" they asked, holding the ketchup bottle ready to pour. So they're thinking, of course this is how you make spaghetti. And I'm thinking, of course you do not put ketchup on spaghetti. In my mind, the way we made spaghetti was to throw together a quick sauce, let it simmer for an hour, and ready to eat. In their minds, ketchup was made from tomatoes, tomato sauce was made from tomatoes, so it's the same thing. So this really small example, which we still laugh about, is just meant to show that we all have our own understanding of the way that things are. Food is one area, but there are a lot of others. Who you talk to, what should be shared, who can be trusted, what we have control over versus what is out of our control. The list goes on. As a counselor, it's very important to have a good understanding of your of courses before you start meeting with clients. Nearly always their of courses will be different. Sometimes a person's of courses relate to the etiology of disability, whether or not disability is a topic that should even be discussed, whether or not a person who has a disability can or should work, how one goes about addressing barriers or limitations, and on and on and on. Being able to understand and appreciate another worldview is critical. The next set of slides has some basic definitions that will be important as we move through this class. An important and pretty basic term for us to understand is race. Race is a classification method based on genetic origin. In our country, we think of race in the following categories: white, black or African American, American Indian or Alaska Native, Asian, and Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander. And on the census, which you can see if you click on that link, a person can also indicate that they belong to more than one race. Culture is another important term. Culture is distinct from race in that there are a shared set of learned values or behavior. People can share the same race, but be of different cultural groups with distinct values and norms. Race and ethnicity are often confused or used interchangeably, but they actually mean different things. Take a minute to watch this brief video about the differences and how each is used. So just one more definition. Multicultural counseling occurs in counseling interactions among individuals from different cultural backgrounds. So this week you read about social justice. Some of the key questions for us to think about And what makes this approach different than more traditional counseling approaches is the consideration of how the social and political environment comes into play. Another question to ask ourselves is, how are the worldviews of people from socially devalued groups, and like we said in class, the text is heavily focused on cultural groups, but we're going to add disability, sexual orientation, religion, and other ways that people are different. And how might these different perspectives impact counseling relationships? As you'll recall from the chapters, when we assume universal definitions for mental health, we're taking a risk. By using a norm that is based on the majority, we're inadvertently failing to take into account things like time, community standards, and differing cultural values, and then classifying someone as abnormal when he or she may be behaving in a way that is within the norm for his or her community or cultural group. In the social science literature, we see similar assumptions. Historically, individuals from racial and ethnic minority groups were considered to be genetically deficient or culturally deprived. Now, these statements assume that the majority group is normal and anyone else isn't. This way of thinking puts the blame on the person and perpetuates the myth that individuals from racial and ethnic minority groups are somehow inferior. Can you see how being seen this way or treated this way would make a person not want to seek mental health or other kinds of counseling? An alternative view that recognizes people as diverse rather than inferior can help us to approach people in a way that legitimizes alternative lifestyles, norms, and values. So, as you read, social justice counseling has 4 major goals, and you can find this on page 109 in the text. Social justice counseling aims to produce conditions that provide equal access and opportunity, reduce or eliminate disparities in education, healthcare, employment, and other areas that lower the quality of life for the affected population. It encourages counselors to consider multiple dynamics of the person and the environment in determining the issue, where it's coming from, and how to address and treat the issue, and broadens the role of the counselor to include things like advocacy, consultation, education, etc. In the text, the authors present the case of Daryl. You can go pause this and refresh your memory if you need to. Daryl is having trouble in school, and there are a few ways of determining the root of the problem. One way, in this example, the school staff have taken, is to say that the problem is with Daryl. Daryl's getting in trouble, so his behavior needs to change. Another way is to look more broadly, as Daryl's parents have. They know that Daryl has never acted like this before. They know the environment has changed, and the problem may at least partially be attributed to what has been going on at school. The authors walk you through principles of social justice counseling through Daryl's story. I've summarized them on the slide for you here, but in summary, social justice counseling is a method of interacting with individuals in a way that is respectful of diversity, acknowledges the role of the environment in any issues or problems experienced, and searches for solutions that are aimed at both the person and the environment as needed. There is recognition that smaller systems, like schools for example, are reflective of the larger culture, and that intervening at this larger level is difficult because often systems do not see a need for change or want to change, and trying to do this can even result in sometimes punitive actions. However, there is a responsibility for us to be an advocate and a change agent when necessary. So what does this mean for us as future counselors? Social justice counseling is very consistent with the goals and tenets of rehabilitation counseling. There are many similarities, so it's likely that this feels familiar to you. Individuals with disabilities are a traditionally devalued group, and often any issues or problems experienced have been seen as their problem. Those of you familiar with the medical model of disability may have already noticed the similarity. Social justice counseling as an approach recognizes that the problem may be with the environment or social system and may not be the person. This will guide how the issue is addressed and may require that the environment be changed or altered. Advocacy is often required, and as counselors we have a responsibility to recognize our power and influence and how we can use that to create positive change. I found this video that is an example of how a person was able to use her power or privilege to point out unfair treatment and hopefully influence some change. It's important to remember that cultural competence and multicultural counseling are about social justice. I liked that video. Hopefully you did too. So as the authors point out in Chapter 5, our mental health system is inherently biased in favor of individuals from majority culture and represents one form of institutional or cultural racism. Traditional counseling theories are rooted in Western and Euro-American cultures, and this view has shaped the way we think about mental health, diagnoses, and treatment. By keeping with one westernized view, that we're really harming individuals who don't fit this view by asserting that they're dysfunctional. In order to provide culturally competent counseling, we have to deconstruct these ways of thinking. Sue and Sue identified 5 main components of ethnocentric multiculturalism. Belief in superiority, and this is the conscious or unconscious belief that majority culture is better, more advanced, more civilized, and normal. An example here is white privilege, and I'm going to ask you to read something about this a little bit later on. The second tenet is belief in the inferiority of others, and this is, again, conscious or unconscious belief that the appearance, customs, values, religions, etc., associated with racial and ethnic minority groups are less desirable. This will continue on to the next slide. The next thing is the power to impose standards. Now, I guess we can say that every cultural group thinks that they're the best, so the feeling of superiority is something that probably everybody shares. What's different about majority culture is that we can express this superiority over other groups because we have the power to do so, and that's what provides the mechanism to oppress on a large scale. Manifestation of institutions. For example, our legal, educational, communication, management, services are all based on the norms of the majority. This results in the inequality of power and access. And finally, the invisible veil. Here, we noted that the values and beliefs that we have are the result of conditioning, so we're not necessarily aware of how we are biased and prejudiced. If we're not aware of these things, it's very difficult for us to become competent. So here in the U.S., we have a long history of oppression, despite our founding beliefs that all men or people are created equal. Individuals from racial and ethnic minority groups and women were historically the targets, but even in the current news we see examples of continued efforts to prevent equality for everybody. 3 examples that come to mind for me immediately, you may think of others, are people with disabilities. I think about accessibility and employment, the GLBT community. Right now we're in a big debate about marriage and adoption, and immigration, legal residency, and who can become a citizen. So with the knowledge that there continues to be a struggle for many people to gain equality, let's think about the therapeutic impact. We know that past and present discrimination creates distrust of the majority society. We know that counselors who fit into the majority culture may hold biased attitudes whether we realize it or not. We also know that these power differentials, the perceptions and resulting behaviors can influence relationships, an ability to gain trust, and people to work together. So as we said, multicultural counseling implies differences between the counselor and the client. Sometimes the differences do not hinder the relationship, but sometimes they do. Much depends on the counselor's awareness of his or her own biases and limitations, and their willingness to be open, honest, non-defensive, and genuine with the client. In some cases, the client may request a new counselor. The responsibility for providing expertise and trustworthiness is with the counselor. Part of understanding the world's view of clients means understanding how they have formed. Can you understand why someone may think the way that they do? So this credibility is a major task in the early stages of counseling when you're trying to create a working alliance with clients. When there's obvious differences between you, the client may feel the need to evaluate your credibility and trustworthiness. Your credentials may not be enough, and you'll remember the discussion about mental set from the chapter. So the way that you respond, your interaction style, and your personal characteristics really will ultimately influence whether clients feel like they can trust you and work with you. So after reading the text this week and thinking about some of these critical issues in counseling, take a minute and answer these questions for yourself. How do you understand culture? What is its relevance in counseling? What is its relevance in education? And what is its relevance to you? So thanks for sticking with me through this lecture. I have a few more things for you to read and do. So at this point, go back to the course content folder and continue with the material.